while Biden is the presumptive president-elect, we must see that the elections have shown a very divided and animated American polity. And Americans' issues at home will start to echo outwards. It will be a big question of how to deal with the pandemic, the economic crisis, and demonstrate that America is strong, confident, and that is the route to regaining its respect and strength internationally. Because as you said, Simon Chesterman, the reality is in that these last 10 plus years, the relative strength of China has come up. And we are perhaps again at the inflection point where if America does not recover, the relative strength of China will be reinforced and the rise of the others cannot be ruled out. So we really have to hope that America domestically must sort itself out before we think about its policies overseas. The second point I'd make, and focusing on ASEAN, is that it's not been an easy 4 years for ASEAN. There is a deep current of American engagement in its corporates, its security, and that's continued. I mean, to give credit to America, America is a behemoth, and that current, that consistency has been there even the last 4 years. But the last 4 years has also seen kind of choppiness. Besides the current, the deep current, there's kind of a wave action. And on those turbulent waves, this orange bobbing ball has been everywhere. And the first year, he engaged Asia and ASEAN, making the longest trip of any sitting president. But clearly, no policy vis-a-vis ASEAN emerged. Now, I must admit, I was a relative fan of the ASEAN stance during the pivot years, where the Obama regime administration really seemed to get ASEAN and understand how ASEAN worked, which is not easy, and how it might be useful in those multilateral engagements vis-a-vis China, which Steve and others have talked about. In other words, if one is minded to deal with China in a multilateral way, to engage friends and allies in the region, one will come back to ASEAN. One will figure out that ASEAN's East Asia Summit, ARF, they're not perfect mechanisms at all, but they are there. And they are useful in their own way. And sadly, the Trump administration, from the Singapore summit onwards, has failed to turn up the very basic of diplomacy. Now, even if they did turn up, I think as Steve Okun's point about being able to offer some of the competitiveness in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative and infrastructure, you need to turn up with a credible alternative. The Japanese are doing it, the Australians are trying, America returning to the table, not only diplomatically, but in substance, in development, infrastructure, will be a critical one in engagement with ASEAN. But they have to be quite ginger about it. As my friend Bilahari Kausikan has made very clear, the last few years has given China so much scope in ASEAN that a push and shove might actually end up disuniting ASEAN, which is not good for ASEAN, and I would argue not good for anyone in particular, including America. The last point about ASEAN, I think, is that the critical part will be for Biden to think through how his emphasis on the Quad and democracy will play out. ASEAN is famously democratically non-democratic. I mean, it's got it in this charter, democracy and human rights. But when we look around us, none of us are really very perfect democracies. And I think that the question mark of how you weigh the geopolitical issues about building an international order, keeping Asia engagement, sort of competing with China with your friends, versus emphasizing those values, democracy, human rights, will need to be played out. And the second element, which Nirmal mentioned, was comfortable to play Australia, Japan, and perhaps India, as Kanti has said. But if you play only those and emphasize that Quad, then what happens to ASEAN? And do you set up a tension between these two initiatives? Let me move on to climate change and use an illustration of the chop and change in America and the need to build institutions. I think Simon Chesterman put it very well. We really have to deal with new issues in a new way. America is still the leading country of the world, but the world is changing. And America's position in the world is changing, and got to deal with it. Climate change is a particular example of this. No one country can solve it. America, though, cannot seem to make up its mind. You go back a little bit further to Bush, and then to Obama, and then to Trump. You can see the cycle of belief, joining, not joining, and literally the date of which Trump's legal withdrawal from Paris Agreement occurred just before the count started. So really, I think this demonstrates that America needs to find some consistency. Now, again, going back to that deep current, I'm very happy to say that companies in America, cities in America, many states in America get it. Now, exactly what to do with climate change, they haven't quite figured it out, but they're actually well positioned to make an energy and other transitions and be a leader in many of the technologies and services that the world will need to be carbon neutral. America can do it. The question is whether they're minded to. Broadly speaking, I think Biden's attempt to come back into climate change will face resistance from certain sectors and industries in America. But we hope for America to come in with more commitment and that for strong current pro-climate issues to be surfaced. My last point of this is to go back to the rules idea. I think really what has discomforted a lot of us in international law and in the law school where I'm with Simon Chesterman is that this competition with China and broadly speaking, America first has been a question of playing by the rules or playing outside the rules. Now, there are areas where new rules are needed, like technology, and really there will be a lot of competition and conflict there. But again, negotiating a regime is different from insisting on your way unilaterally. I think hopefully Biden will realize, his administration will realize that America has helped build the international system. There's no reason why America cannot lead the modification of the international system, whether in the WHO, the WTO, the climate change regime, or the new rules we need technology to really lead and make America great again, but not spelled with GRATE,